Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in with a My Hero Academia video. Very late on a Sunday night, chapter 331. I hope I get the video out in time. Hey everyone, how's it going? So, My Hero Academia, we're back from a break. We have an interesting chapter in some respects, and it ultimately continues the fight between Shigaraki and Star. So, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts here. I do have some general notes that I think are relatively important. And then, in terms of the chapter page by page, it's going to be a good one because the author spent time talking about the power, which I personally always really enjoy. That's what I like the most from Shonen. It's always the power exposition. So we're going to definitely dive into that. I will say, I think that the official translation is very good. When I was reading the fan translation that came out on Friday, that one had so many points that I felt were shaky because of the exact wording. But when you look at the official translation, it's pretty tight. Mind you, though, I don't really know if that was happening because the translator for the official made things make more sense, or if it's naturally just that the fan translation was inaccurate. I am very curious about that, but I do appreciate that the official translation gives me less points to nitpick. Okay, so moving on from there, we have the chapter 331. We see Shigaraki do stuff. I want to talk about the purpose of this whole thing in general. So I'm honestly surprised that we kept going with Star. I'm very surprised we're doing another chapter of this. Honestly, the thing is here, right? How many of us actually think Shigaraki's going to lose? Like, how many of us think that this fight is going to prevent Shigaraki from being at the final battle, right? Not many of us. I think we all think Shigaraki's still going to be there at the final battle. And when I say Shigaraki, I mean like the body of Shigaraki is going to be there at the final battle. The body with all these terrible quirks in it that are, like, really represent the real danger in Hero Academia. So because of that, there is a kind of just like a small little annoyance, maybe. I don't know what to call it. I'm not too annoyed. It's just you're kind of going through the motions. Like, you kind of know that no matter what Star does, Shigaraki is at the end of the day still probably going to go walk back to All for One or whatever. Like, we're still going to see Shigaraki have his identity crisis. And so when you have that, that's going to happen. What you're really looking for is like, okay, what little thing, what little concession, what little victory within this horrible situation are we going to get, right? It's always like that little wrinkle that's going to be happening afterward. Now, the reason that I'm bringing that up is just because when I'm looking at this, knowing that really, at the end of the day, Star is going to be coming out of this as technically the loser. I mean, when you look at the chapter, the girl has already kind of lost. The moment that she's bringing in stuff from outside, the moment that she's bringing in external factors like Tiamat, she has already lost. Like, the only reason that she hasn't been killed is because Shigaraki most likely wants the quirk. But she's already at a point that she can't actually take out Shigaraki. So you're at this point, you're at best going to get a stalemate. If not, you're going to need outside help. Which, of course, not a bad thing. But on a level, this is already her loss. When I'm looking at this, I feel like this is going to be the story of why the Japanese heroes were mostly left alone. I think that the author knows it is really odd to have a situation of the magnitude that's occurring in Japan and only have the Japanese domestic heroes be the ones to respond to it. I think he knows that's odd, so this entire little side trip that we're doing here is, I believe, just here to justify why every other country is going to be a little bit apprehensive of sending their heroes in. Because I'm thinking about it from the perspective of, if Star goes down and the US loses their number one hero, they just lost a significant portion of their workforce, and they just lost a very strong component of their justice system. They're not going to want to send more heroes over to Japan because they're going to think like, no, we got to bunker down in case Japan can't get this guy under control. Heck, we don't know. The US might think to nuke Japan just flat out. Although, ideally, we don't do that. But that's the kind of thing. And when it comes to the other countries, they might look at the situation too and be like, okay, the US's best technology didn't do it. Star and Stripe didn't do it. Why would we send in our people? They're like lambs to the slaughter. So that might be the reason that other governments hold back their heroes, because they might think like, we have to observe what's going to happen in Japan as much as we can so that we can build like a countermeasure. Really give them whatever reason you need to do, as long as you have the motivation being Star's story being a cautionary tale, it's going to work. We can call the government stupid and we can like play the game of like, you're going to let him get stronger. This would be the best time to take him out. But the governments don't know that, right? So that's why you can play the game. Anyway, point is, this entire mini arc might just be here to justify why it's only domestic heroes at the final battle when it comes to dealing with Shigaraki. Mind you, there might be like one or two from some countries that show up. Like I know that the author drew up his old protagonists. Like they were in that volume preview that the old protagonists might be showing up in the story. They should be showing up in like in the next 2 chapters, I think. But regardless, at this point, I feel that Star is just an overglorified excuse to justify why it's going to be mostly Japanese domestic heroes fighting the final battle. Now, mind you, if he does something different, 100% I'm into it. Like, if he does something different, I won't have expected it. So as a reader, I'll be super happy. But at this point, I'm seeing this entire thing as a plot device. Now, speaking of plot devices, this is something really cool to talk about because this is referring to the author's hand in this, or in this case, the My Hero Academia author's particular style. So, you know, a few chapters ago, I think, I mentioned that, yeah, Star and Stripes, she got her flashback. This girl's pretty much done. And I still stand by that. Like, you know, we have another chapter of her, but she's pretty much done. This chapter has another example of something that Hero Academia author does. And it's specifically this panel where one of the pilots is thinking about his relationship to Star. And it's like the one that says, "Starting today, you boys are under my wing. When we die together, brothers." So really interesting because Star also started this whole chapter or little fight off by saying, "Anyone that dies, I will personally deliver your remains." So I don't know about this dying together. But regardless, what's actually critical here is the fact that the author drew this in. Because when you think about it, if you take the components of the chapter and you look at it for what it is, just kind of picture yourself drawing this chapter and then ask yourself, why bother filling in the relationship between Star and these pilots? Like, really think about that. Because when you see a superior and a subordinate, it's pretty simple, right? Like, you have a relationship based on hierarchy. This is your boss. You do what your boss says. Like last chapter, you showed off patriotic spirit. Really, on paper, we already have every little detail that we need in order to build a relationship between these characters. But then you have this guy having the flashback. Now, what's critical here, and this is where it becomes really fun, is that Horikoshi has a very particular style when it comes to these type of things. When it comes specifically to building up the relationship between characters. And there are 2 factors going into this. One thing is that the author typically is not that fast when it comes to revealing character relationships for characters that are going to be in the story for a while. Here you have him revealing the characters. Like, to give you the comparison, remember Sun Eater's fight? Sun Eater was in the story for quite a while before you had him filling in the details on him and Mirio's relationship, right? To really build it up. And why did the author ultimately do that? And what happened after the fact? Well, after Sun Eater got that critical moment of fleshing out his relationship with Mirio, Sun Eater dips out of the story. Sun Eater isn't really coming back into the story. Also, that moment happened long after Sun Eater's introduction because the author saved it for a climactic moment. Then when you come back here and you couple what you're seeing here with the patterns that we've seen from the Gaunt, that being like the Gaunt got almost all her storyline explored in terms of her backstory, and then after that, well, we haven't seen her, and we're in the final arc, so the amount of time that Nagant's going to come back and actually have something worthwhile to do, chances are it's not going to happen. Like, she's going to come back in the same capacity that Sun Eater comes back, that being, oh, it's a character that you see sometimes, doesn't really have that much dialogue, not critical dialogue, but you see him like do pivotal things like during a fight or something, right? But it's not really that same level of emotional kind of work that you see going on here. And the point is, when you look at these things and you consider the author's style, he sits down and he ultimately decides, in this thing of a fight, I'm going to take a moment, I'm going to take a reprieve to explain this girl's relationship with these guys, to show that Star has this particular quality and that their relationship is more than just being a boss and a subordinate, right? In terms of like, yeah, there's really hardcore camaraderie going on in here. Now, I got another example. Nemto is a character that got screwed over by the anime because the anime just thought, oh, this is a really unimportant detail to include, and that was referring to Nemto's friendship with Shizaki. When you look at the Nemto situation, what do you understand from the Nemto situation? Well, it's a lot of the same things that we've seen again. After Nemto has this very critical moment of explaining how much he likes Shizaki, he falls out of the story. He's not really that important. Like, again, when it comes to Hero Academia, when these characters have those moments of explaining how they're related to another character, or how they care about another character, that tends to be there for their climax, and they don't really come back after that. Nemto's situation was there to build towards a climax that was Nemto ultimately making a shot for Shizaki's sake. When you have this now when you come back to this, you know, you're looking at this guy, he's thinking about Star. Really, this is the same kind of energy as the Nemto situation in terms of explaining why someone looks at a particular character with this kind of fondness. And in this case, it's because we're going to be building up towards some kind of climax. So you put all these things together, and what it really says is these guys aren't going to be long for this world, or they're not going to be long for the effective length of the story. And you can also say, like, okay, like, this is happening because we're probably going to get a climax in the next chapter, or maybe in the next 2 chapters if the author really wants to drag it out to make Star seem a little bit more respectable. But again, when you think about it, this entire fight has been, let me show you all the ways that Star is weak. If you look at it, the fight is all about her limitations. So he's already kind of screwed the pooch on this one in terms of making her seem very powerful. And mind you, that's partly because Shigaraki is just that unfair. But there are inherent limitations that we've seen, such as the super strength limitation, that even Shigaraki is kind of counting his blessings on. So overall, the author, I think, has tells, and when we're talking about the future of Hero Academia, we're heading towards a climax. These characters are probably not going to be relevant as we go into the future. They're probably not going to get that many lines. If they show up, they'll probably have like a little... It'll be pretty much the same energy that Sun Eater had during the raid on the mansion. So you can play semantics however much you want on that and say whether or not that's relevant or not. But yeah, these characters are pretty done, especially in this chapter. Everything in this chapter is just building up to a climax, and because of the things that have already been given away about these characters, it's this thing that says that, according to the author's current style, they're not going to have a lot of longevity. Just to talk about the author's style when it comes to revealing background details, if you look at the side characters, the background characters, think about, for instance, like a lot of the Class 1A lower rung characters, right? We know that Shoji's going to have a storyline, right? Shoji hasn't had that many parts of his character revealed, and that's ultimately a byproduct of the author's style. When he has characters that he knows he has plans for in the future, you don't really get all that many critical details about what those characters mean to other characters. Those details really only pop up when you're getting close to that character's time in the story, which ultimately just leads to, with his style, you can tell for how long a character is going to be relevant. For Shoji, as long as I don't see some certain lines come out of him, I know that we still have more content of the story to pretty much clear. But that, again, byproduct of the style. Anyway, with that said and done, let's go into the page-by-page walkthrough. So, page 1. I love it because Star recognizes that Shigaraki just grew out his hair, but we live in a quirky world, so why do I really... It's not really that big of a deal. Like, he could just have a hair-growing quirk for all she knows. Anyway, this page isn't all that important other than to say that it was an explosion from Shigaraki. What kind of explosion was it? It was just a release of energy from what we see. We see that the clouds are also kind of got blown away. So yeah, just a small release of energy. Not really a big deal. I know some people were thinking that it was going to be something big happening last time, but it's like, nah, like, remember, Horikoshi uses cliffhangers to make things more exciting, and then he sometimes walks it back. Mind you, this one is more on the readers if you interpreted something worse happening, but it was just a shockwave type explosion. We go into page 2, and page 2 is just a pretty badass page of Shigaraki with his lion mane, and he's talking about how he talks about how he understands New Order while he's on a guy's back. That's cool. Now, on this page is where we start the really cool stuff, right? So I like the information that was given to us. That is, the government strictly oversees the quirk. The particulars of how it works are highly classified, though the public gets the gist based on her visible heroics. I like that it's in brackets, what they had to write here. And that to me feels like that's like that little addendum. Just like, oh, but you know, people are able to see. People have eyes. People can figure it out. The girl says things out loud. She touches a target, says its name, and assigns her rule of choice. Now, what's important here is that this seems to be a narration. And that narration seems to be coming from Neo Shigaraki. And we're just going to call him Neo Shigaraki just so you know I'm talking about the amalgam. So this is narration coming from Neo Shigaraki. So pretty much everything Neo Shigaraki says is implied to be what the public understands of her quirk. Which I think it's completely fair because this is a very visible quirk no matter how you look at it. She touches a target, says his name, and assigns a rule of her choice. Then Neo Shigaraki mentions that it practically redefines what a quirk can be. Does it though? Like, that's a little bit... I do think that's a little bit sensational. And I know, she is the most aggressively reality warper quirk we've seen before. But there are other quirks that kind of redefine what a quirk can be. Just Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow by itself redefines what a quirk can be because Dark Shadow creates a separate consciousness. That's actually a pretty critical thing, and we don't fully understand how that was possible. Dark Shadow's existence doesn't take away anything amazing from New Order. New Order is, again, a very interesting quirk. Like, the only other quirk that I can think of that reality bends, just by virtue of how it works, is probably Momo's quirk. And Momo's quirk only does that because I don't think that the author thought about one particular detail when it came to developing that quirk, that being conservation of mass. But, all things said and done, this was good. It was good to understand what the rest of the world knows about this lady's quirk. Because when you have this kind of situation, if people know that there is something going on about naming, then other geniuses or other supervillain geniuses in America must have had the idea of testing Star with disassociation from names or fake names, right? Now, mind you, the chapter doesn't touch on any of that kind of stuff, and I don't think we'll ever touch on it. But if the author ever has time and he just kind of talks to us about how other villains have tried to thwart Star in the past, and like maybe she has experience dealing with villains that try to thwart her in the past, it would be cool to just see that kind of fleshed out. Just because it is completely reasonable to expect that there are high tier villains in America, and it would be cool to see how much the author has kind of thought about the quirk and countering it. Anyway, we go into page 4. And this is where we get some pretty interesting stuff, where All For One is kind of trying to figure out how the quirk works. Now, one thing I'm going to say here is the guy's guessing, but because of the nature of the story, you could say that maybe 90% to 100% of his guess is going to be correct. There might be a little thing of Star saying like, ah ha ha, you might have thought this, but actually there's this. Because that's always possible. That said, what you're looking at on these pages is that you're looking at the information and you're looking at what you've seen before and you're like, okay, is Neo Shigaraki's analysis consistent with the reality that we've seen before? Because this will be the big marker of whether or not the author has like the power mostly under control. If a character can observe the power as well as we do with the information that we know the character has, then that just speaks good things about the observers watching the situation and the author's ability to analyze his own power. So, this is going to be important because this power does require little detail, so I'm just going to read through every little bit here. As far as powering up a living physical body goes, there's a hard limit. Otherwise, she would have tried to kill me right from the start by crushing my head with pure power. So at first, I thought that first little line was a little bit loose, but when you look at the reasoning, it's like, okay, based on that reason, yeah, I can see why you would say that there's a hard limit, and I understand what you mean by hard limit. Yeah, there is a hard limit. She can't become stronger for some reason. She can't hit All Might's strength. That is very interesting. So props for that. That's a really good observation. On the other hand, there's no limit to how much a rule can incapacitate someone. So this one was really interesting because I'm really happy that the author had the flashback to say, okay, this is the example that All For One is linking here. And sorry if I switch between Neo Shigaraki and All For One. I'm very used to saying All For One when I'm seeing such a nice analysis here. Anyway, his heart will stop. Now, I think there might be a limit because of the flashback that was chosen. Right before his heart will stop line, there was, if this person moves any degree at all, right? It looked like there was a condition. It's not flat out, she could say, your heart will stop. It looks like there has to be some kind of condition there. unless that was a moment of mercy. That said, how would All for One distinguish between a moment of mercy or a limit? So that one there might be something that could be overturned in the future, just because there was a conditional applied to that situation. And then this is like one part that I don't fully understand, where he says, one can think of it as a barometer with an upper cap, a gauge she can set at will, I suppose. So I don't understand what this was trying to say, but I don't think it's all that important, so I'll just move on. They go on to say that, judging from the fact that she didn't say if he touches the air within the set range he dies, and this is my favorite part, one assumes that the new rule can't arbitrarily involve things she hasn't touched, just through roundabout wording. So this is pretty much semantics, this is pretty much power lawyering. I'm 100% happy that the author said this, because you saw it. If you're on the comment boards or you're on the forums, you saw all kinds of people saying like, why couldn't she just say, if Shigaraki touches the air here, he'll die? Well, first off, can't do that one because of the name issue, but if someone touches the air here, they will die. No, you can't do that because you're trying to affect someone by using this thing that you actually named. So you can 100% understand what he means by just through roundabout wording. Really, I think that's really elegant because a lot of people are going to be difficult about it. So I really love that. And honestly, to me, like the way I think about it, if you want to kill someone who touches a particular space, I think one of the good ways to do it too, and I think this would be completely legal within the power, would be saying something like, the space 100 meters away from me will emit gamma radiation. Like, there's no way around it. A lot of people are going to die if they get exposed to gamma radiation. And so, or you could do another thing like, oh, the space in front of me will be enveloped in hydrogen gas. Now that actually, because like I'm saying the air in front of me, but then I'm also naming hydrogen gas as the thing that will replace it. I don't know. Is that actually possible? Because like creating a vacuum, you're removing something. You're not creating something. You're removing. Actually, I'm not sure you could replace. Actually, I think it might be reasonable to say that New Order can't create something. I don't think filling a pocket of air with another gas is actually legal. Oh, but that one's a little tricky. Alright, there might be a few more limits there in terms of like inanimate objects. But whatever, I do like that the author covered his butt on that one. Anyway, what I also like here is that All for One doesn't remove the idea or the possibility that can happen when he says, or perhaps you could make such a rule, but maybe it would be less effective. And then he points out to the lasers and the vacuum as the proof as to why maybe that's not likely. So I would actually like confirmation if she can make a rule and if it's going to be weaker there. Anyway, he goes on to say that she boasts an incredible degree of freedom when it comes to non-living things. And when it comes to that, I think I would agree. Then we go into the difference in efficacy between rules for non-living and living things must have to do with the process of naming the target. Her new rule for me didn't take because her understanding doesn't quite mesh with reality. When Miss Star, and I really feel Miss Star is the thing that indicates there's a lot of All for One talking, touched me, she believed me to be Tomura. But even my understanding of myself is hazy. Am I Shigaraki or All for One or Shimura even? So this one is pretty interesting, I think. First off, I like that they pointed out the issues with name, and I like that, how much you identify with your name is probably what affects whether or not that rule will take hold on you. I do like that. This was a very good observation. But when he brings up Shimura, that's the interesting one. Like in the fan translations, I think this is something that fan translations did a little bit more clearly. But they said Tenko Shimura. So I think it's interesting that Neo Shigaraki right now is in a place where he's wondering how much of Tenko is coming in. And it's possible that Tenko might be making himself more loud in Shigaraki's subconscious, just because we kind of have to start building up the idea that Tenko is there to be reached. I know when I said this way back when something was holding Shigaraki back within his subconscious, people were saying like, nah, it might not be, it's not Tenko. But now it's just, when we are walking to a situation where Izuku's going to be saving Shigaraki, you do have to start planting the seeds. And mind you, like the authors already planted the seeds before, but little moments like this just kind of waters those seeds a little bit more, which make it more worthwhile. At this point, it's also worth pointing out that Shigaraki himself, Neo Shigaraki is not aware of the struggle that's currently happening in the vestige world side of things. That is his subconscious, so he doesn't actually know that he's being so grossly taken over by All for One. Anyway, we move on to another really interesting part. When calling the name of a target with a sense of self, Miss Star's understanding of the target identity must align with its own. Makes sense. For targets without a sense of self, her one-sided understanding is enough to enforce a new rule. This is actually super critical. And I really like it because it explains something that I was wondering. What is the difference between a table and a stool? Because they can both be four-legged objects with a plane that's sitting on top of the four legs. If you're a baby, that stool might be a table for you. But if you're an adult, you can see clearly that it's a stool. But heck, a table could be a stool too if you're being a little bit arrogant. Anyway, if Star has a mistaken idea about what something is, she can still apply the quirk. Because that thing won't be able to fight back against what Star says it is. This is something that would work if you're targeting things that have different understandings and different cultures. I can't come up with a good example of this, but I really like that. Or if she ever sees an object she doesn't understand, she can if she mistakes his identity, it'll be fine. So I actually really like that. That's a really clever thing to set up there. Anyway, All for One goes on to say, only two targets at a time. Only two targets at once, I suppose. And what's her effective range? Now, I'm not sure about effective range, but what he said later, would it work if she called my dog Mon by his name, Mon? So that's really interesting. This is another thing that says, okay, yeah, a little bit of Tenko might be slipping in here because it's not often that we talk about Mon-chan. But I thought that was really good because now we were moving from the black and white of something with sentience and something with no sentience. Now you're going into a dog and it's like, does a dog know its own name, or does it know what it's called, or does it know the sound that it should respond to, or does it actually know enough to internalize what a name is? And just to give you the example, someone could say hey to me and they're not saying my name, but I know they're referring to me, right? When it comes to Mon, does he know he has a name, or does he know how someone refers to him? So it's it is actually a very interesting question. That might be one where saying the dog might even be worthwhile here, because it depends. I actually kind of want to see how it would work with an animal, because that would say something interesting, but it would be such a non-important detail. But still, we then have Neo Shigaraki saying, what's gotten into me all of a sudden, this irresistible urge to test out her rules. I've never been so on edge. And I do think this is All for One talking. All for One gets giddy whenever he has new toys to play with. So I think that's what's happening here. Him acknowledging that he's never been on edge is the Shigaraki part of the personality, acknowledging the weirdness of the All for One part. Now, this is a weird thing here. He must have a way to get around attacks that hamper his breathing. I guess she's referring to vacuum, or maybe the fact that they're in the high atmosphere. So she's trying to figure out how he can still breathe. Honestly, I really feel like regen can just say it's regen, and I personally wouldn't argue with that. But the fact that the author brought this up is weird. Because there's no real need to bring it up, because everyone else would just assume it's Shigaraki with augmentations and regen. If the author's bringing it up, it might lead to there being something critical that might pop up in the next chapter. It's kind of hard to tell. I also feel this could have just been something that he put in there just to cover his butt, but I don't understand why he needs to cover his butt. So we'll have to see next chapter to see if this actually leads to something. There was some weird drawing on Shigaraki's face in one of the earlier chapters, but I don't know. The fan translation said he must have a breathing apparatus hidden underneath his clothes. So it's really interesting how far the translations go. Anyway, we go to page 6. And this page is pretty much Star saying yeah, this ain't working. Star calls out to Commander Akbar. And we all know who this is. It's Akbar. This is clearly a reference to Star Wars. And I'm just going to say, if we don't have an "it's a trap," if that phrase does not get uttered in the next 2 chapters, then this entire manga is dead to me. What a colossal waste of time. Obviously, that's a lie. That's a joke. But it would be a wasted opportunity if you don't have him say it's a trap. Please, just give us that. Anyway, back to this. Star points out that she has special authority, so that's special authority to decide when people can fire missiles. And then Star says, and this is really interesting, this punk's graduated from being Japan's local menace. He's now a threat to the world. So, All for One has technically always been a threat to the world. And that just kind of goes to show how much they don't know about All for One. Because this is just kind of silly to say out loud. But mind you, it's because All for One was so good at covering his tracks. Like, All for One has always been a global threat. He just kind of decides to slum it in Japan, but who knows? He might have plans. Like maybe in his 200th year of life, he decides to go take over the entire world or something. I don't know. Anyway, it tells us what Star is thinking. That's all we need. Then we had the page that we already talked about with Star and how she relates to these guys. And one of the pilots is named Wedge. I feel like that's a reference to something. Top Gun, maybe? I don't know. I didn't watch Top Gun, so I don't know. Anyways, Shigaraki's back on his gnome when we go to page 8. Page 8 is one of the ones that I think the official translation really makes a lot more interesting and makes a lot more tight. Because in the fan translation and the spoilers, like, this did not make full sense here. But the wording in the official really fixed it up. So here we have Star saying, the air forms into my shape, but 1,000 times bigger. This actually tells us something really interesting about Star's quirk. That is, Star's quirk does not, to borrow terminology from Genshin, it does not snapshot. It is continuously updating. If you know programming, Star's quirk is effectively doing a updating loop. It's doing a run loop, essentially. And what that really means is every time Star moves, that order, the air forms into my shape but 1,000 times bigger, is constantly being updated. It's constantly being applied every single second. So to give you a better idea, set two coordinates, right? X and Y. X is 0, Y is 0. The first loop happens. It records 0, 0. The two coordinates move. It goes to 1, 1. The loop runs again. And then you have, oh, okay. It's 1, 1, so it updates. It's cool that the quirk doesn't execute the command once. It's cool that it's constantly updating, constantly running that loop. Are there any parts in the previous bit where we see that being disagreed with? No, but this makes it so much clearer because you gotta be really careful with the wording here. If you switch the wording slightly, it doesn't explain what is actually happening here. So I'm really happy they went with the air forms into my shape, because after that, all you need to do is assume that it's a continuously updating command, or order in this case. Also worth pointing out that Star's quirk does not see her clothing as part of herself, so that actually makes a lot of sense. Anyway, the next little bit is just showing off the giant star punching Shigaraki. Can't really say that I'm all that impressed by it. I mean, I do kind of wonder how much force the air has to be able to punch Shigaraki like that. It's kind of hard to tell because you don't really know how compressed the air is, so I can't really imagine how this is being modeled in terms of the physics, so I'm not really going to bother. Anyway, on page 10 and 11, we have Star just deciding not worth it, and she uses clap. And we also see Shigaraki get beat up, and a gnome will get beat up, but it's like, should we care? These things have hyper regen. Now, in 12 and 13, for as great of a bit of a chapter that we got, we have this very interesting thing. The lasers combine into one. Now, this is where maybe one area where I think the fan translation was a little bit better. Because the lasers combining into one doesn't explain how you exactly get the lasers in the form of a lance. Like, I don't fully understand how this is possible. Combining into one has nothing to do with making the lasers solid. The fan translation said that the lasers combine into one and harden, which is a little bit different and it makes a little bit more sense. What is worth pointing out, though, is that she's taken off super strength at this stage. There's no way she has super strength on when she has the lasers combined into one and then the air shape of her body. So, given that the fan translations had more information here, I do kind of wonder if there is actually harden happening at some point here. This is probably the most questionable bit for the chapter when it comes to Star's power. Anyway, after that we have Thunderbolt pretty much just being hit by lasers, and we have a non-stop blast of Max laser. He'll burn away to nothing. Now this page was actually pretty cool because this is the page where Star says like, yeah, no, if the lasers could take him out and burn him to nothing, Endeavor would have finished the job. And it's like, yeah, actually, Endeavor did do his best, but Shigaraki was able to regen from that. Also, it's interesting how close to the water they seem to be now, right? Like, it is actually really interesting how close they are. Also really interesting how the lasers are interfering with the water, but not the point. Anyway, on page 16 and 17, we see Agbar, or whatever his name is in this series. And this is another page that is just like, this one actually didn't hit me in a nice way, or, you know, I'm ambivalent to it. I think that's the thing. I'm ambivalent to it. When I look at this page, I'm thinking like, it feels like you tried to shove like an arc's worth, and when I say arc's worth, like say 20 chapters of character 20 chapters of like characterization and like familiarity into this one character. And it's especially with that page of All Might posing with, what's her name here? Cassie, when she was a child. Just seeing that there, it's just like, yeah, okay, you know, like when I'm looking at it, the author is trying to tell us, yo guys, look, this is her story, this is what she's about, this is what inspires her, this is what she is. But you know, when you have something like prepare to surpass him, Cassie, and they're talking about All Might, and it's just like, I don't think you guys have like, this means nothing to me, right? It's because I've only known you for 2 chapters, and it just makes it feel like I understand it on an intellectual point of view. I understand that the rest of the world exists as Hero Academia's story happens. I understand that in America, this girl probably had an entire thing of like she wants to live up to All Might's legacy. But the thing is, this is one of those spots where you hit the conflict between what the story has been showing you and what the story is telling you. And it's tough for me too because I do like these type of worlds. I like the idea that somewhere in the world this girl was out there busting her butt to be as strong as All Might, or to like live up to All Might's legacy or something like that, right? The thing here though is, I think with the way that she was brought into the story, like she's brought in, she comes in saying like, oh, I'm All Might's student or whatever, and it's like, you're just a fangirl that he saved who happens to have a really powerful quirk. And it just, when you look at it, the entire arc as well, I think I could have accepted the idea that there is a world of people inspired by All Might. But I think the thing that takes it over the edge is just how she was said to be so important. How she is made to look like she is bigger than life. If she was bigger than life, we would have heard about her at the beginning of the story. But she's not. It makes her seem more like she's a little girl trying to live up to this big shadow. So I think ultimately this is an issue of execution. Like if you want a better example of these kind of characters, you know, One Piece does not have this particular problem that My Hero Academia is having right now. In One Piece, you hear about characters from a very long period before they actually ever show up. So that when they do show up and they do something amazing, it's like, yeah, wow, that was really cool. It's a world that is alive, and when we actually go and see little snippets of what those other big characters are doing, it's like, yeah, I feel it. I really do feel it. Even in light novels, like in High School DxD does this really well. You can introduce all these other big names, and then you eventually get to meet them. So ultimately, when we come back to this little situation here, you know, it feels like a lot of characterization. It feels like she's the main character of a manga, except, you know, it's just not really introduced here. Overall, she just feels kind of like an afterthought. She just feels like something that was just nicely slipped in here instead of something that was a breathing part of the world. Actually, I think that's the thing that makes the big difference here. It's because of how easily you could remove her from the story and nothing would change. You can't really do that with, like, say, the Yonko in One Piece once you see them. You can't remove them from the story because their presence in the story is felt from much earlier than when they arrive. Similarly, you can't do that with the warlords. And I think in this situation, that's the problem. When you have a bigger than life character, when you have a character that means so much, I don't think you can just bring them in out of nowhere. I understand that, again, she lived her own life and the world feels a little bit more lived in, but the consequence of having a more lived in world is talking about that world more. Because otherwise, like, we all make the joke, Hero Academia felt very isolated when it came to Japan. Heck, apparently some people didn't even know that Hero Academia took place in Japan. So, and that really just goes to show how isolated Hero Academia tends to be when it comes to the manga. It's a little bit different when you look at the anime. But yeah, that's how I feel ultimately about it. When I look at this final page, it just ultimately feels a little bit more tacky to me. It feels a little bit more out of place, and that in of itself makes me think that, yeah, this character is not going to have a big footprint after this fight in Hero Academia. If I was giving advice for stories, I would definitely say don't do what Hero Academia did. If you're gonna do this kind of thing, if you're gonna have this kind of character coming in like this, if you're gonna be telling us that, yeah, you know, the world is full of people who have valuable story, or like there's a world full of people that have been positively inspired by All Might. If you're gonna be doing that, you have to talk about the world more before those characters show up. But also important to just kind of appreciate that this is 100% a product of the manga schedule, the manga creation schedule. I think if the author had time to really think things through, he could have done things a little bit differently and make it a little bit more connected. I do think this is a byproduct of just the nature of serialization, and I do think legitimately the author is making the best of a tough situation, and I do 100% respect that. To speak on the content of those last 2 pages, we know that Japan's been informed that missiles have been sent over. We understand like how the top brass interacts with Cassie. We understand that she's pretty much a maverick in the top brass. It feels very movie-like, honestly. It feels like what someone thinks America is after watching a couple of really patriotic movies. Kind of hard-boiled a little bit as well. Even the flagrant defiance of the rules, that's 100% a maverick. I did think the picture of her and All Might was really cute. And ultimately we have Tiamat. Now Tiamat, if you play D&D, you know what Tiamat is, but Tiamat's a Babylonian god, like whatever. We know a lot of times people like calling their stuff after mythological things. We were talking about this on the live stream, but it's just more of the same. Like Tartarus is named after something mythological. The guards at Tartarus were also named after something mythological. Mythological references everywhere. Calling a weapon something that is... naming a weapon after some kind of mythological figure, that's par for the course. Everyone does it. Heck, Gundam does it all the time. So no real big deal there. Now, will the missiles work? Well, I am really hoping that we get that wonderful scene of It's a Trap. That said, what can the missiles really do? I don't know. How much explosive force will they have? I don't know. Does Shigaraki just have a quirk that can absorb all the explosion? Maybe. You never really know. It'd be funny. You know, actually, it'd be super funny if Shigaraki, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but Shigaraki has Warp Gate. He opens a Warp Gate right when the missiles are coming and sends them to UA. Because then you can get It's a Trap, and it would be hilarious. Imagine. Now, if you wanted to win the game, that's how you win the game. You Warp Gate missiles to every other spot in Japan that's been giving you trouble. If Shigaraki was willy-nilly with Warp Gate at any stage before this, if he does have it, if he was willy-nilly with it, they would not have sent those missiles, because they would have been like, oh, he can warp things. But now I'm actually wondering, oh, I really hope he says it's a trap. That would be hilarious. I mean, in a really dark way. I'm really only looking at this. It'd be hilarious from the perspective of the Americans, but for everyone else it would suck. But because it's Hero Academia, Izuku's going to be okay. Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see what ends up happening here. But there's no real reason to believe that Shigaraki's gonna die. I mean, this is the Save Shigaraki show, not the Grind Shigaraki into Atoms show. Anyway, guys, that's it for me. Let me know what you thought down below. Overall, I think this is a really interesting chapter, just because we see a lot of things. We see a lot of the author's thought process on this one. And it gives a lot of topics to talk about that we don't usually get in Hero Academia. So, guys, let me know what you thought down below. And until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.